Ravensbruck was a concentration camp that was slightly different to others inside of the Third Reich. It was established as a camp exclusively for women, and it was here where many of the most evil female Nazi guards were trained. They were taught at Ravensbruck how to show mass brutality and contribute to the depravity caused inside of camps such as Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. They were taught utter violence and barbarism, but inside Ravensbruck itself, it's estimated that between 30,000 and 90,000 were killed inside of the barbed wire fences. However, after the Second World War, a number of trials took place in Hamburg, aimed to bring a number of former guards and officials at the camp to justice. Despite a huge number of guards working at the camp, only a small amount ever saw justice inside of a courtroom. Today we look at the justified executions of the female guards of Ravensbruck. Remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Construction of Ravensbruck began in November 1938, and it was to hold only female prisoners. In May 1939, it opened with 900 women moved from another camp, and within 8 months of the Second World War starting, it was at capacity. Because of this, it was expanded, and the biggest number of prisoners at Ravensbruck at one time was around 45,000. It's estimated that 130,000 prisoners passed throughout the camp, but around 50,000 died from disease, starvation, the harsh labour conditions, and around 2,500 were killed inside the gas chambers. Amongst the thousands killed, there were many spies who were executed from other countries, including members of the SOE, and the camp was huge, with 70 sub-camps serving it. There were many male members of staff who worked there too, along with 150 female SS guards, who were tasked with overseeing the prisoners. As mentioned, as a training camp, over 4,000 female overseers learned there, and many of these women went on to be known in infamy with the horrific treatment of the Holocaust. For example, Irma Grazer, the hyena at Auschwitz, was trained at Ravensbruck. The treatment of the prisoners was barbaric, with guards accompanied by SS men, armed with dogs and whips, overseeing the prisoners during the day. Prisoners would be forced to undergo the long roll call, and were often beaten rather awfully, sometimes even to death. One guard, Elfriede Müller, was so harsh that she became known as the Beast of Ravensbruck. Maria Mandel, a guard who worked in a senior capacity at Auschwitz, was a chief overseer at Ravensbruck, and was later executed for the deaths of 500,000 people. Prisoners were forced to wear symbols denoting what sort of prisoner they were and where they were from, and many when they arrived at Ravensbruck were forced to have their heads shaved. Over the years, mass deportations of women from Ravensbruck to Auschwitz took place, with them being forced to undergo selections once there, resulting in the deaths of thousands as soon as they arrived at Auschwitz. Conditions inside of Ravensbruck were rather terrible, and they deteriorated quickly as the camp was expanded. It was said by a survivor that they didn't shoot the women, we were to die of misery, hunger and exhaustion. When we arrived at Ravensbruck, it was the worst. The first thing I saw was a cart with all the dead piled on it. We didn't even feel like we had the value of cattle. You worked, and then you died. The sort of work the women were required to do varied in its purpose, but it was all hard and heavy labour. Some women worked in the factory making soldiers' socks, and some worked to build V2 rocket parts. Before Ravensbruck was liberated, the SS leadership tried to remove as many prisoners as possible, and they forced all women physically able to embark on a death march. When the camp was liberated, less than 3,500 were found malnourished and ill, but after the clean-up operation, the focus shifted to bringing those responsible of crimes against humanity at the camp to justice. The SS guards, female and male, and former workers at the camp were arrested by the Allies, and from 1946 to 1948, a series of trials took place. Many of the guards were never brought to justice, and did escape following the end of the war. Ultimately, there were 7 Ravensbruck trials. The first was held on December the 5th, 1946, and lasted a few months, with 16 members of staff on trial. During the first proceedings, 7 women faced a judge. These were Dorothea Binz, Greta Bosel, Margarete Mewes, Elizabeth Marshall, Carmen Mory, Vera Southquart, and Eugenia von Skin. Dorothea Binz served as a deputy warder, and she was known for brutality, having personally been responsible for the torture and death of many. She was said to have beaten, slapped, shot, kicked and whipped prisoners on a daily basis. She carried a whip with her German Shepherd, and at a moment's notice she would kick prisoners to death or set her dog on them. Allegedly, she even had a boyfriend who she would take around on romantic strolls around the concentration camp. Greta Bosel was involved in the selection of prisoners and was heard saying, "If they cannot walk, let them rot." Margarete Mewes worked as a jail warden, and during the trial was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Elizabeth Marshall worked as a nurse at the camp, and she was involved in overseeing medical experiments, and at times she even killed some of the prisoners herself with lethal injections. She was involved in also seeing which prisoners would be shipped to Auschwitz to be killed. Carmen Mory was a spy who also worked as a capo at the camp, and she developed a terrible reputation for brutality towards many of the inmates. She initially was even alleged to have been sent to the gas chambers, but her friends struck her name off the list, and then she rose to prominence. Vera Southquart also was a capo, and her job was to serve as a nurse in the medical wing and to fill out death certificates. She took an active role in the killing process, poisoning many of the prisoners, rather than sending them to the gas chambers, as she could not be bothered to arrange their transport. Eugenia von Skin was also an inmate and a capo, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. At the first trial's conclusion, Dorothea Binz, Greta Bosel, Elizabeth Marshall, Carmen Mory and Vera Southquart were sentenced to death, along with other men to be executed. Carmen Mory took her own life before the sentence could be carried out, and it was Albert Pierrepoint who executed these women. Inside Hamlin Prison, a gallows had been created, and the usual rule for executions was ladies first. The condemned were held inside of the condemned cells at Hamlin for a short amount of time, and then they were taken out of their cells to face the executioner. Pierrepoint before would have met all of the condemned to calculate their weights, heights and drops required to snap their necks, killing them instantly. Upon being called from the cells, they were brought into the execution cell with their arms fastened behind their backs. Identification took place at the bottom of the gallows, and then once this was done, they were marched up the stairs by the guards. Last words were asked before Pierrepoint straightened the women and checked their restraints before placing a black hood over their heads. He then placed a noose over their heads too, and shuffled them over a chalk X he had drawn on the floor, before Pierrepoint then quickly pulled the lever. The executions were performed swiftly, and within seconds of the condemned entering the execution chamber, they were dead. Dorothea Binz, interestingly, was executed first on May 2nd, 1947, with the other women executed on the 3rd, and Vera Southquart being executed the following month. During the second Ravensbruck trial, no female guards were brought to justice. However, 5 female camp officials were brought to trial in the third Ravensbruck trial. These were involved in the leadership of the Uckermark subcamp, which was found around 1 mile from Ravensbruck, and it housed teenage girls aged 16 to 21, labelled criminal and difficult. Of these 5 women brought to trial, 2 were acquitted, 1 was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, and 1 was sentenced to life in prison, but only Ruth Neudeck was sentenced to death. She served as the chief warden of the extermination camp, and was known for her murderous actions. In one incident, she allegedly cut the throat of a prisoner with the sharp edge of a shovel. She was also involved in the executions and selections of over 5,000 women and children, and for this she was executed in exactly the same way as the female guards in the first Ravensbruck trial were, with Pierrepoint taking her life at Hamlin Prison on the gallows. During the fourth Ravensbruck trial, 3 former members of staff, all nurses, were brought to face a judge. Their charges focused around mistreatment, sending people to the gas chambers, and also torture. Only one, Greta Bosel, was sentenced to death, but her sentence was later withdrawn, and instead she spent a number of years in prison. The 5th and 6th Ravensbruck trials resulted in the imprisonment of a number of male guards and also 1 death sentence. But during the final 7th Ravensbruck trial, 6 female camp wardens, or Aufseherinnen, were tried on the 2nd of July to the 21st, 1948. They were accused of ill treatment towards prisoners of Allied countries, but also in sending many prisoners to the gas chambers. On trial were Louise Brunner, a chief warden who was given 3 years imprisonment, Anne Klein, a chief warden who was acquitted due to a lack of evidence, Christine Harthauer, who was also acquitted, and Ilse Vettermann, who was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. However, there were 2 more death sentences carried out with regards to crimes at Ravensbruck. Emma Zimmer, an assistant chief warden, who was known for sadistic behaviour, was sentenced to death. It was said she was vicious and dangerous and frightening us, constantly with threats, proclaiming in a sadistic voice, "I will report you, and you will go away. You know where? Just one way up the chimney." Also sentenced to death was Ida Schreiter, who was known for selecting prisoners to die. She was also responsible for the murders of prisoners due to overworking them. Both of these died in the same manner as before, with Albert Pierrepoint being the hangman at Hamlin Prison who took their lives. The Ravensbruck Trials were just one of a series of trials that aimed to punish those perpetrators of crimes against humanity which occurred at the camps. Of course, there were many other guards who worked at Ravensbruck who were brought in front of judges at different trials. In fact, of those women who were known for war crimes and were sentenced to death, the majority learned everything they knew at Ravensbruck, being schooled in genocide and depravity. The Belsen trials, for example, sentenced a number of female guards to death who worked at Ravensbruck, including Irma Grazer. In total, there were 38 defendants in the Ravensbruck trials, 21 were women. Despite less than 40 facing trials for crimes at Ravensbruck, there were a colossal number who never faced up to their crimes and were never punished for them. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.